Hello everyone, and welcome to this short video on online delivery requirements under the Skills First contract. So the objective of today's webinar is to discuss with contracted RTOs about some other considerations that you'll have to make if you wish to move your delivery or assessment to an online format. So moving your delivery or assessment practices online will allow you to potentially continue training under the COVID-19 restrictions. And not only that, but it also creates a longer term efficiency in your business processes as well. Now, there's a lot of RTOs that are contracted with Skills First who don't necessarily have the previous experience with online training, and perhaps your business is one of those that is still using predominantly paper-based resources. Given the nature of the programs, you might have some fairly practical-based programs as well. And so what we want to talk about here today is just some of the contractual obligations that you'll have to consider if you do move to an online engagement, whether that's completely online or even just a small percentage of your programs. And also the information about online delivery requirements is not nicely packaged in one location. It's scattered across several documents, including the contract notifications on SVTS, and then supplementary fact sheets as well, which makes it a little harder to work out what your obligations are. As usual, our disclaimer, we are not the department, and you should consider all the facts and reference the contract yourself and all of the additional supporting documentation that goes with it when you're making decisions about your business processes. Again, if you would like to confirm something with the department, there is the SVTS inquiries line where you can do that. So the first consideration that we recommend you make is the Learning Management System, or LMS. Okay, so the contract doesn't actually mandate or recommend any one particular system. It's not like the student management systems where there's a list of approved vendors on the NCVR website. It's up to you to decide what platforms you use to engage with your students online. But you will need to make sure that whatever platform you do implement, that it is the right platform for your organization. Every organization is going to have different unique requirements in terms of how to engage with students. Different programs require different levels of engagement. And so you want to make sure that you're considering a number of things when looking to purchase or implement a new LMS. One of those is obviously the learner experience. So you want, at the end of the day, your primary focus should be on the learner's experience. And you want to make sure that you're implementing a platform that is interactive, intuitive, and extremely engaging for those students. You want to be able to make sure that it's a platform that's going to be easy for you to train your staff and students how to use it. And you want to be able to make sure that your staff are in a position to utilize that system to communicate with the students effectively and also support them when they're having issues trying to access resources, etc. There are some fantastic LMSs out there on the market, but some of them are very complex, and if they're not set up the correct way or your staff are not trained, they can work against you. You also want to think about how you're potentially going to restructure some of your pre-existing materials. So if you've got paper-based workbooks or assessments, how are you going to reformat those into the LMS that you're planning on utilizing? There's also a cost consideration there as well with the system, and also the time that you spend in your business training staff, converting resources and setting up the framework of that LMS. When you're looking at those LMS options, you should also think about whether or not that's something that could potentially integrate with your pre-existing student management system, or even if your student management system has its own LMS functionality in it, then you may not need to look for additional software. You may be able to just keep everything under the one system. I think this is probably a webinar in itself, this topic, and there are some people out there who have done some fantastic webinars already on this topic, but we may look at doing something down the track. But for today, we want to just focus on those contractual requirements. So the first one that we want to point out is the online delivery restriction list. So under that funded courses list, there is a subset of qualifications that are not allowed to be delivered wholly online. Okay, and there's a list, a snapshot of those qualifications on the left there. Okay, so these are typically things that are delivered under an apprenticeship that have significant practical skills that need to be demonstrated or learned and practiced in an appropriate setting or in a physical environment. So you can see just by scanning your eyes through some of those qualifications, you can probably understand why they potentially couldn't be completely delivered online. Okay, so if it's any of those qualifications, then you will not be able to deliver them completely online. You may be able to deliver components, but not the whole qualification. The other consideration is the online service standards. So in the contract, it is a requirement under clause 1.4 that you publish your online service standards in a prominent place on your website. So just like we have to publish our fee schedule, provide access to prospective students to our student handbook, have our complaints and appeals policy online, we also need to make sure that we've got our own personalised online service standards. And this is typically something that gets missed by a lot of skills first providers. The information that sits inside that online service standard includes information about student support that's available, the entry requirements and induction process for inducting into an online program, the learning materials or information about the types of learning materials that are provided and potentially also required to complete the course, how you will engage with students and what platforms you might be using, the mode and method of assessments that will be utilised as part of that program to demonstrate competency, and also details of the trainer and assessor skills and experience in online deliveries. So that's also something that would need to be included. There is an example template that the department has, or a complete template that the department has provided as a guide for that, and we'd recommend referring to that as well. Also, just a quick note to say that you probably should, if you are going to utilise that you would want to create your own version that was contextualised to your practices as well, so that it will not necessarily be a one-size-fits-all deal. It will be something that you would contextualise to, say, for example, the student support that your organisation provides, the engagement methods that your organisation will implement. The pre-training review is another consideration that you'll have to make, and we have spoken about this in previous webinars. So I'll be brief with this one. But the additional information that you need to collect as part of that PTR includes the digital capabilities of those prospective students, and also capturing information about their access to the necessary technologies, and then identifying or documenting any steps that you may have to take to overcome those barriers. So for example, we would recommend that as part of that PTR process, that you ask the students whether or not they actually have access to reliable internet, a computer, if there's certain software programs that you require students to utilise, do their computers have the necessary hardware to be able to access them. That's what we want to make sure that we're ensuring, because it's unfair to enrol a student into a program if they don't have the tools necessary to be able to access all of the relevant materials. And the above information should be taken into consideration when you're determining that PTR outcome. So when you're determining whether or not a student is suitable for a particular program. So students, again, they have to demonstrate the capability to be able to undertake online learning, or that digital capability. And if they don't, and then potentially the online training program is not something that would be suitable for them. Your training and assessment strategies are also something that you'll have to revisit, because they would have been built around your existing processes prior to the coronavirus situation, or prior to you even making the decision to move to an online engagement. So you want to make sure that those TAS docs are planned in a way that's suitable to that online learning environment. And that may mean having to create updated versions of existing TASs or even create new ones. Okay, so online courses must be designed around that online environment. You don't want to just replicate your classroom-based resources either. So taking your PowerPoint slide decks or some PDF documents, putting them on a portal and telling students to read them themselves is okay to do that if you want to provide access to those resources, but it's not exactly what we would consider engaging online content. So you need to think about how you can potentially take some of those things and make them slightly more engaging. The TAS docs should include a methodology for engagement with students from between trainers and students and support staff. You need to make sure that learner progress monitoring arrangements and evidence-informed feedback models are designed to strengthen learning outcomes. We also want to make sure that our validation methods for online assessment tools are working. And then moving on to skills first teachers. So training providers must implement a PD program specific to online delivery. So any skills first provider, as per clause 7.24, any skills first provider who is looking to engage in online delivery or assessment must have a dedicated PD program to ensure that trainers have the skills and knowledge, or the tools and the support to be able to engage effectively with students in an online environment. Okay, so they must undertake PD as part of that program. They should, at a minimum, have the ability to use contemporary technologies, or at least use those technologies available as part of your processes. They need to be able to facilitate and communicate effectively. They need to be able to provide feedback to students through an online forum, and they need to be able to do that in a timely fashion and effectively. They need to also make sure that students continue to be motivated and continue to progress through their courses. And that's a critical one, and one that the department will focus on a lot, because the last thing they want to see is funded enrolments or funded individuals dropping off and completion rates dropping because people are not as engaged as they were perhaps if they were in a classroom. You want to make sure that you've got your trainer and assessors register, and that you've got details of their participation in those PD sessions that are specific to the online delivery. So you want to keep a track of that as well. From an EVETMIS reporting point of view, the biggest consideration that you should make here is what you would need to change with respect to your delivery modes. So if you've been traditionally delivering units of competency and reporting them with an internal delivery mode, because it's face-to-face training, if you decide to flip that and change the delivery or engagement to predominantly online, then you would need to, at a minimum, make sure that you reported an external delivery mode as well in the NAT 125. Okay, so for units of competency where a student doesn't attend a physical location and materials are provided online, in other words, online training. If the predominant delivery mode is online, so the majority of that training for that unit is conducted online, then you would need to make sure that the predominant delivery mode identifier, which also sits in the NAT 120 file, is also selected as E for external. The training organisation delivery location is important as well. So taking an example in Victoria, if you're delivering training, let's say in Dandenong, and that's traditionally being delivered face-to-face, but you're now switching to an online delivery mode, then if that's the majority of that training is being delivered online, then you should be using the EVETMIS delivery location as the location where the training is being coordinated from. And that's typically your head office. Okay, so that's that rule there. If your predominant delivery mode is external, then you may look to update your delivery location that's being reported. Also, it's worth noting that with the regional loading, which is based on the postcode of the delivery location, that doesn't apply for any programs that have a predominant delivery mode of external. So if you are delivering predominantly online, you will not be eligible for that 1.1 times subsidy. Okay. Students, as part of the contract, need to be present in Victoria at all times when they're undertaking online training or assessment. So there's nothing in the contract that says you have to provide evidence of a physical presence to be cited and retained, but you do need to ensure that students are present in Victoria during the training. Okay, so this should be included under the student entry requirements in your online service standards documents. And when you're building that out, you should consider what those entry requirements are and potentially pull in that Victorian presence requirement. Now, the student can be temporarily located interstate or overseas, and this is typically only if they're conducting placement. So for example, if a student's, Albury-Wodonga is probably the perfect example, where a student might be undertaking study in Victoria, but then they have to move into New South Wales and cross that border to participate in, say, practical placement for a particular program. Okay, so no more than 50% of the total scheduled hours can be delivered online during that period that they are potentially interstate. So just finally, what we would consider your next steps to be if you are looking at implementing online engagement under Skills First, or if that's something that you've already done, then we want to make sure that you're choosing the right LMS that suits your organisational needs and utilises or leverages off your existing skill sets. We want to make sure that we're exhausting our existing IT systems. We don't want to have to go out and purchase expensive products if our student management system already provides the opportunity for us to engage with students online. We want to update our business policies and procedures. That includes the pre-training review, so making sure that we're capturing digital capabilities as part of that process. We want to make sure that our TAS docs are updated, and we also want to make sure that we've got that professional development program implemented and staff are undertaking that PD requirement as an ongoing requirement. As I mentioned before, we want to update or create new TAS docs, and we also want to make sure that we've got our online service standards published and present on our website. So there's a couple of things there to consider that a lot of organisations generally miss as part of moving and reacting quickly to the rapid changes in our industry. But finally there, you just also want to make sure that your admin staff are aware of the reporting requirements, so the event miss reporting requirements as well. And that's another one that typically will get missed. So you'll have to potentially go back into your system and update units at an individual enrolment level, or you may be updating that at a group level or a class level, just depending on what student management system you're using. So hopefully that short webinar has given you some food for thought. If you are interested in discussing that further, we are still offering the April free sessions where you can book in a time to chat to us and ask us for some advice. So there's some instructions there if you want to do that. Otherwise, all the best moving your systems online, and we look forward to putting out a couple of extra webinars into the future.